Today, in current events from a Christian perspective, a giant, and I do mean enormous, Hindu statue that is about 90 feet tall towers over a suburb of Houston, Texas. Yes, deep in the heart of Texas. Why? Why did Christians think this was okay to allow? How do you feel about this statue towering over Houston, Texas? Is this just another giant example of religious liberty like the Statue of Liberty, or is there more going on here from a theological perspective? Are we really better together? Is diversity our strength? And really, do all roads lead to heaven? Do all roads lead to salvation? We'll look at all of these questions and more today. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. Welcome back to Church Public. I'm your host, as always, and really appreciate you stopping by today. We have some interesting current events to look at today, as I mentioned in the intro. But before we get to that, as always, I really appreciate you listening. If you're on audio, thanks. That's where a lot of people are. If you're watching on video, or if you're just listening on audio and go, hey, I never even knew there was a video of this. Well, there is. You can go to churchpublic.com. You can see the video there. You can go to the brand new Substack. You can go to substack.com/@churchpublic and see the video there. And if you like what you see, you can you can subscribe, you can leave a comment, you can support the channel. All of that is helpful. I'm just trying to get the word out on how to live out your faith from a Christian perspective, because as we see, and as we'll see in this episode even, it's harder and harder to do. This world is more and more anti-Christian, pagan, anti-religious, secular, whatever word you want to put there. It is just less and less Christian. And so we have to figure out, as believers, as followers of Jesus, how do we live? How do we encounter this? If you're driving through Houston, Texas, and you see a 90-foot tall Hindu statue, what do you do with that? Do you just say, okay, move on? That's what we're going to look at today. But we look at current events from a Christian perspective so that you can live out your faith. So check all of those spots, like, share, subscribe, do all the things, blah, blah, blah. You know all that. All right. So I'm gonna go back in time here. I'm going to go back in time and say I just watched a video from a few years back now of one of my sons coloring on his hand with a Sharpie marker. And it was kind of hilarious, but also you can imagine that was not ideal. And my sweet, wonderful wife was like, what is wrong with you? Why are you coloring on your hand with a permanent marker? Now, of course, that's not what she said. She said something wonderful and loving to the effect of stop coloring on your hand, in which my young son at the time looked at her straight in the eye and said, I can't. And I think my wife was maybe a little puzzled by this response. She's like, no, of course you can, and you should. And they continued to back and forth, and this back and forth was both frustrating and hilarious. He could just not see the value in stopping, even though with every mark of the pen, more permanent marker was going onto his thing. And so, like, it was frustrating, but also, like, a little bit hilarious and silly. He was being obstinate, but it was cute, but it was nonetheless disobedient. And so you're like, what does this have to do with anything? Why am I starting this story? Well, the reality is that even though my young son was doing something fairly innocuous and innocent at the time with a permanent pen, there are those who consistently push boundaries and test limits. That's just the reality of it. And for your parents out there, obviously you know this. Kids are just inherently doing this. But it doesn't stop with kids. And that's what we need to remember. We see this in all areas. And we see it all over the place. But sometimes we're kind of immune to it. We don't realize that's what's really going on because we live in our bubble and they live in their bubble. And we think, like, as long as their bubble doesn't hit my bubble, then everything's okay. But that's not how communities work. That's not how societies work. That's not how countries work. Everything does impact everything else, and those boundaries that we consistently push do have an effect on everybody else. So most recently in America and in the West more broadly, the limits have been constantly and consistently tested by those who are non-Christian, or I'm going to say anti-Christian. And what I mean by that is, if you are not for Christ, you are against him. There's no middle area. You can't be like, oh, he's okay, but I'm not really a Christian. Like, that's against Christ. I hope you understand that. I'm not trying to be incendiary, but the reality is, like, there's only one way to Jesus, and there's only one way to God, and Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. If you're a Christian and have been for any amount of time, you know this. Again, like, start in John, there's all those I am statements. that tell you and show you Jesus is the only way. Not one of, just the way. If you have more questions about that, I did a long, extended thing. You can go back in the archives and look for the coexist, because that coexist sticker really shows this idea that everything is fine and everything is the same and it's all level ground and it doesn't really matter what you believe. But the reality is that's not it. And that's not true. So what's been happening around America, and again, the West, but we'll focus mostly on America for now, is we've been seeing other pagan religions largely brought in by people who came here to the country and brought their religion with them, and rather than assimilate into a Christian culture, brought their own pagan thing with them, whether that is Muslim, Hindu, all kinds of other things, just weird spirituality. There's witchcraft. I've talked about all of these things at different times, and the reality is, again, there's only one way. There's the narrow way following Jesus, and there's the wide path that leads to destruction. Again, Matthew, go and read this. This is Jesus' own words. So we see this kind of testing, going back to my son and maybe your children, as you're continually pressing that boundary and pushing to see how far you can go. We see this in all kinds of areas of pagan religions across America, and they're seeing how much they can get away with before the Christians just protest. And unfortunately, the reality is, I guess, pretty far. People can go all the way up to making a seriously enormous pagan Hindu statue. Now, this is not the first time that I've talked about this. I talked about it, I think, in August or September of last year when this went up. But for some reason, over the social medias in the past week or so, this has been getting more press again. Maybe people just discovered that it was there because I have some proximity to it. I have known it's there for several months now. But I think it's worth talking about again because it is illustrative of this larger issue that Christians either don't know what they believe or don't understand why they believe what they believe, or they just look at this kind of stuff and go, well, religious liberty, so do whatever you want. But of course, that's not true. So in America and in Texas, nonetheless, they put up this supposedly, anyway, in Texas, which is a conservative state, it's the largest statue in the state, and I think it's like third largest in the country or something like that. Statue of Liberty, of course, is bigger, but at the moment, I think the Statue of Liberty is losing to this one. So it went up in Texas, which is a very conservative state, or at least it was. And this statue was of a Hindu god, Hindu. So I'm not going to get too much into what Hindu is. The one thing that you need to realize is it's not Christian, just period. That's really all we need to say about that. I've studied Hinduism at length, and we don't need to go into all of the ins and outs of that right now. But what you need to understand as a Christian is it's just not. There is no parallel. There is no corollary. You can't say Hinduism's kind of like Christianity light or whatever. It's just as far as the East is from the West. It's not Christianity. So again, I'm going to apply this label that's going to make people mad at me. It is anti-Christian. You can't be a Christian and do not Christian things. This is the way it is. I hope that makes sense. Again, I know some of you are probably already sitting there getting uncomfortable because we can't limit other people, right? We can't limit their religion, right? Well, no, we can and we should stand against blasphemy and pagan idolatry. I mean, anybody remember like the golden calf, this famous story in the Bible where, of all things, if you don't remember this story, go back and read this story, largely in Exodus. So Moses is actually talking with God on the mountain in the burning bush, getting the 10 Commandments, and the people down on the bottom, at the bottom of the mountain, get bored, tired, frustrated, fearful, all kinds of things, and say, well, we're not really sure what we should do, so we're going to create an idol, and then we're going to worship that in place of the living God because we're really not sure what to do. And we don't want to, be alone in this universe. So we're just going to do the next best thing, which is create this golden idol and then worship it. That's bad. And it was bad then. And it was pagan idolatry then. And it's pagan idolatry now. Building giant golden idols is not good. It's not biblical. It's not Christian. It is not fit in worshiping the one living God. Again, hopefully this is not news to you, but apparently No one saw this come up, and this temple said, we're going to build this thing, and everybody just said, sure, why not? Or if you don't like that, how about the first and greatest commandment? Back to the 10 Commandments, which we just talked about. You shall love the Lord God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Jesus says this in Matthew 22:37, but it is a direct reflection back to the 10 Commandments and the commandment in Deuteronomy, etc. So thinking about that command, love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, the greatest commandment, which Jesus tells us he gives his followers. So here's the question for you. In what context can we tolerate idols to Hindu gods if we love the Lord our God with our heart and soul and mind and strength? I'll let you answer that question, but it should be a pretty obvious answer. So what happened? Let's just look at the facts of this story. This Hindu statue is now the third tallest in America in Sugar Land, Texas. The Pran Pratishta ceremony of the 90-foot-tall Hanuman statue was on August 18th. So yeah, I talked about this in August. You can go back and listen to that episode as well. It's named the Statue of the Union, third tallest statue in the United States. It stands as a tribute to Lord Hanuman's role in the reuniting of Sri Rama and Sita, blah, blah, blah. I mean, whatever. This is located in the Sri Ashtalakshmi Temple in Sugar Land, Texas, and it is the focal point of global interest because, again, it's a very tall statue to this Hindu god. Now, you're sitting there again going like, well, Matt, what about religious freedom? You can just do whatever you want. Man, this is going to be a controversial issue if you don't realize this, but I believe we've been lulled to sleep by some vague liberal sense of religious freedom, quote unquote. On the one hand, this in no way is the ideal that the founders had. So this idea of religious freedom that is so popular in America right now is not what this country was founded on. I'll say that again, not what this country was founded on. And you're like, Matt, this is religious freedom. It's First Amendment. Like, this is what it meant. It's not what it meant. This is not what they meant. This is not how any of this was supposed to work. And you're like, oh, I don't believe you. Fine. Read about the early American court cases regarding the First Amendment and blasphemy. And what I mean is the First Amendment was in place and people were brought to prosecution for blasphemy while the First Amendment was in place in all kinds of states, even New York. There's a famous case in New York where there was a blasphemy charge against a person that was prosecuted, and the First Amendment still stood, and no one had any problem with this because everyone realized that the First Amendment does not mean you can worship anything and you can say whatever God you want. No, it just means you have the freedom to not be infringed by the government when you worship God. And you'd probably be surprised that state after state had no trouble prosecuting these blasphemous offenders of God while upholding this First Amendment. But again, that's all changed based on liberal court rulings, based on liberal judges, based on liberality just in general, that promotes a secular worldview rather than a spiritual worldview. I know this is getting rather theological, and I'll try to keep it at a place where it is understandable, but we just really have to understand that the government is not the ultimate authority on earth and under heaven. So I'm just going to say that statement. The government is not the ultimate boss. I know we like to think that, and we sometimes operate like that you have to do whatever the government says at any time, period. Now, let me caveat that. Of course, Romans 13, the government is to be followed as far as possible. Yes, 100% yes. Unless they go against the Lord. And that is also in Romans 13. If you don't believe me, go and read that. We are under no, and I mean no, obligation to do what the government proscribes if they go against God. This has been true for Christians for 2,000 years and true for Israelites for even longer than that. In fact, it's not even been the way of Christianity. It's been the norm for Christianity. Go back and read history of Christianity throughout the millennia. All across the world, there are precious few times where Christianity lined up with government. In fact, I'll do another episode after this where we talk about some of the things going on in China right now, where Christians right now are being persecuted for things as silly as giving away Bibles. So over time, over history, in the last 2,000 years, there have been very few times where Christianity actually was living in prosperity under the government, or they lined up with the government. There have been some, but it has not been the norm. We're currently living in the shadow of such an era. And what I mean by the shadow is, I think that time is coming to an end. And this statue happens to be one of those points that points to this. This statue reminds us that we used to live in a Christian nation where people understood that God is to be praised, period. And now we're under this weird delusion that we think you can just worship whatever you want and you'll still get to heaven or still receive salvation, but that's just not true. And I know you'll say, you can't legislate morality, you can't tell me what to believe, and you're right, I can't tell you what to believe. You can legislate morality, that's a separate issue based on the government protecting the rights of the citizens, but you're right, I can't legislate morality, and I shouldn't try, but at the same time, we don't have to excuse idolatry and blasphemy just because the world says, well, you're mean if you say this is bad. No, we can say there's a good way and a right way, and there's a bad way and a wrong way. And like, the reason I say that is not because I hate anyone. It's actually because I love them. I love them to such a degree that I'm willing to take the heat of the world saying that I'm an ism or a bigot or a whatever for calling people out, rather than saying, well, that road actually leads to hell and I don't want you to go there. So I'm going to say the unpopular thing because I love you more than you hate me. And I'm willing to bear that hate from you and from the world because I would rather share the fact that you worshiping this giant golden statue is not going to lead to the salvation that you think it is. So I'm willing to do that, and more Christians should be willing to do that, but apparently we're either lulled to sleep or scared or just confused that we think we can't say anything. And I would say we can, and love actually would encourage me to share. I can't stay silent and watch this happen, and allow this to just be the reality. So these images put this on the statue. Again, if you're just listening to the video of the unveiling a couple of months ago. And that's where I started with all this, and that's where I want to start to wind this down. The fact that Christians around them didn't believe enough in their own God to say anything about this. And you might say, well, no, I'm just being free. I'm just allowing them to do whatever they want. No, you're not. You're too scared to say, well, that God is not real and this God is real, and bear the weight of the society saying, well, you're evil and bad for saying that, even though you're right. Right? Does that make sense? I mean, we have to be brave enough, courageous enough to say, there's something wrong with this situation. You may look up in the sky and think that you see this and there's something wrong, but what do you do? Or what do you say? Or can you speak up? Can someone around you, do this? And likely what will happen when you get up, I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen. When you get up the courage to look up in the sky at a 90-foot tall pagan statue and say, this is just wrong, your college-educated graduate that's around you will remind you this is the price of liberty. Remember, there's another giant statue in the harbor of New York, and that statue reminds us we celebrate our differences. No, I'm sorry. That's a category error, and it's just wrong. The statue in Texas of this awful-looking fake small g God is not the price of liberty. This is just blasphemy and idolatry. We don't have to accept this, and the Statue of Liberty is not the same thing. And you're saying, well, no, it's another statue. No, the Statue of Liberty, not in the new form of liberty where you can just do whatever you want whenever you want, which is, of course, a terrible idea in every situation. That Statue of Liberty, when it was put up in the New York Harbor, reminded us that we have the opportunity and maybe even responsibility to love our neighbors and love those around us, to the point of including them into the wonderful world that has been created, which has a Christian foundation. Maybe this is a good time to take a Bible break and remember that Paul faced a similar situation when he visited Athens. This is actually one of my favorite stories. I did another talk on it just a few weeks ago, but Acts 17, especially verse 16, Paul was waiting for them, his friends at Athens, and his spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing a city full of idols. That's Acts 17:16. Paul discovered the whole city of Athens had been taken over by idols. And he was provoked by this. Provoked. Provoked is a wonderful world, and I know I try not to do too much Greek because some of you just have your eyes start rolling back in your heads, but it's important to understand here. And the Greek here is a transliteration is paroxino. If you're a doctor, you may be familiar with a paroxysm. If you're not a doctor, it just means an attack or a spasm, a sudden onset. In Paul's terms here, it's a sudden outburst of emotion or action. In other words, Paul went to Athens, looked around, saw all the things that were going on, and was provoked to emotion, saying, "What in the world is going on here? You guys are worshiping every single thing that you believe on the earth and under the earth and over the earth, but you're wrong on all counts." Go and read Acts 17 for the end of that story. Being as clear as possible as I can here, idols and idolatry for all time have always been offensive to God, period. 2,000 years ago in Athens, right now in Texas, anyone who can just accept a 90-foot idol and shrug their shoulders is not really walking with the Spirit of God. And that may sound harsh, but what is the other conclusion? Jesus now is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So, making a 90-foot statue to another God is inescapably offensive to the one and only true God. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I mean, God is God. Again, back to the first commandment, have no other gods before him. Making this 90-foot statue to another god is offensive to God. It's an affront to the very nature and majesty of the living God. Now, here's the part where the train leaves the station and you have to decide what to do. We may not agree on what to do about this. And by all means, I'm not, instigating any form of violence or other destructive action. But we have to figure out what to do, and this and other idols, this is not the only one, are filling up America. I told you a couple of times ago about the enormous Muslim town that has been taken over north of Dallas in Texas as well. So all of these religions are happening, and I mean, I hesitate to even say this, but look at the border of Pakistan and the conflict between Hindus and Muslims there. It's not going very well between those two religions, and yet at the same time, under this weird flag of quote-unquote religious freedom, we're saying, yeah, bring whatever religion you want. I'm sure nothing bad can happen. Yikes. So hopefully we, Christians, believers, can at least come to the agreement that building enormous 100-foot tall statues brings grief and disgrace to the living God. When you hear Jesus say, love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, what does that mean to you? Or again, as I mentioned, to use that second of the 10 commandments, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven or on earth below or in the waters under the earth. In other words, don't make an idol of anything, much less a giant Hindu monkey god. Or you shall not worship them or serve them. This is God speaking in Exodus 20. I, the Lord, am a jealous God, showing love to those who love me and keep my commandments. So for all of this, again, even if we don't know exactly what to do, we have to understand that building a giant idol, building a golden calf, bowing down before a statue, creating these giant statues is not Christian. Again, I would argue that it's anti-Christian, and I, for one, am going to start talking about it more. For Church Public, I'm Matt Odegaard, and as always, I hope you'll keep the faith. Hey everybody, thanks for stopping by. I hope this was helpful to you, and if it is, leave a like, a comment, a review, do all the things. You can go to churchpublic.com, you can go to substack.com/@churchpublic, or any of the other podcast places, and get this and many of the other podcasts that I've produced. This is currently number 436, believe it or not. So God bless, as always, and keep the faith.